The smell wasn't smoke. Not at first. It was sweeter than that. It was the scent of expensive cologne masking the sharp chemical bite of gasoline. The room was small, a windowless storage office at the back of a warehouse in Hell's Kitchen. The only light came from the crack beneath the heavy steel door, a thin line of yellow that was about to turn angry orange. Bumpy Johnson stood in the center of the dark room. He didn't scream. He didn't throw his shoulder against the door. He knew the door was reinforced. He knew the lock was a deadbolt designed to keep thieves out, but tonight it was designed to keep a king in. He heard the sound from the other side, a match being struck against a rough surface, the hiss of sulfur. Then a laugh, a low, guttural laugh that belonged to a man who thought he had just won the war of the century. The gasoline caught. It didn't start with a roar. It started with a whoosh, a sudden intake of breath as the fire consumed the oxygen in the hallway and then pushed its way under the door. The temperature in the room spiked instantly. It went from a cool, damp storage closet to a kiln in seconds. The air shimmered. The paint on the walls began to bubble, peeling away like dead skin. Bumpy pressed a handkerchief to his face. He backed into the furthest corner, crouching low. The smoke was filling the space from the top down, a thick, oily black cloud that tasted of burning rubber and death. He could feel the heat against his face, a physical pressure, like a hand pushing him down. His suit jacket began to smoke. The fabric was getting too hot to touch. But he didn't panic. Panic burns oxygen. Panic makes you sloppy. He watched the flames licking at the doorframe, eating the wood, turning the barrier into charcoal. He wasn't thinking about dying. He was thinking about the man who lit the match. He was memorizing the laugh. He was focusing on the pain beginning to sear his left hand, which was pressed against the hot metal of a filing cabinet for balance. The skin was blistering, bubbling, melting. Most men would have passed out from the pain. Most men would have surrendered to the inevitable and let the smoke take them. Bumpy Johnson focused on the agony. He used it. He let it sharpen his mind. He told himself that every second of suffering was a debt that would be collected, and he intended to collect with interest. If you're drawn to the untold power stories of Harlem and the men who ruled without noise, you're already in the right place. This is Bumpy Johnson Files. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The official police report from that night in 1948 lists a warehouse fire in Hell's Kitchen. It mentions faulty wiring. It mentions property damage. It lists 0 casualties. The detectives who filed it knew better. They saw the burnt chair. They saw the claw marks on the inside of the door, but they buried the file because the truth was something the city wasn't ready to admit. They couldn't admit that the Italian mob had tried to roast the godfather of Harlem alive, and more importantly, they couldn't admit that he had walked out of the fire. This story isn't about a miraculous escape, it's about what happened after the escape. It's about a level of psychological warfare that changed the underworld forever. It will show you that the most dangerous weapon Bumpy Johnson possessed wasn't a gun or a knife. It was his ability to take the worst thing his enemies could do to him and wear it like a crown. To understand why they burned him, you have to understand the betrayal. It was supposed to be a truce. The war between the Harlem numbers runners and the Italian syndicates had been bleeding the city dry for months. Bodies were piling up in the East River. Business was suffering. A meeting was called. Neutral ground. No weapons, just a conversation to divvy up the territories and stop the bleeding. Bumpy had agreed to go. He wasn't naive. He knew the risks, but he also knew that in the world of organized crime, a man's word at a sit-down was supposed to be sacred. If you broke the sanctity of the sit-down, you were an animal. You were no longer a businessman. He went alone. That was his style. He didn't roll deep with 20 bodyguards, because that showed fear. He walked into the warehouse with his head high, wearing a gray wool suit and a silk tie. The man waiting for him was Capo the Butcher Moretti. Moretti was a brute, a man who had risen through the ranks not by being smart, but by being willing to do things that made other men vomit. He smiled when Bumpy walked in. He poured drinks. He spoke of peace. He spoke of cooperation. It was a performance. While they talked, Moretti's men were quietly locking the other exits. They were dousing the hallway in kerosene. They weren't planning to negotiate. They were planning an execution that would leave no body to bury, just ash and bone fragments. When the moment came, Moretti didn't pull a gun. He just excused himself. "I forgot the cigars," he said. He walked out the heavy steel door, and he turned the key. That was the mistake. Not locking Bumpy in, but walking away before he saw the body burn. Inside the room, the heat was becoming unbearable. The metal filing cabinet Bumpy was using for cover was radiating heat like a radiator. His hand, his left hand, was ruined. The skin had fused with the fabric of his shirt cuff. The flesh was raw, weeping, and charred. He needed a way out. The door was wood, reinforced with steel. Fire would weaken it, but the fire would kill him first. Bumpy looked up. The ceiling. It was an old warehouse. The ceiling was pressed tin, but above that was rot. He dragged the heavy, scorching filing cabinet to the center of the room. The metal seared his palms, peeling away layers of skin. He didn't grunt. He gritted his teeth so hard he felt a molar crack. He climbed on top. He used the heel of his shoe, slamming it upward into the rusted tin. Once, twice. The smoke was choking him now. He was dizzy. His vision was tunneling. 3 times. The tin gave way. He pulled himself up into the crawl space just as the floor below him burst into flames. He crawled through the dark, rat-infested space, his body racking with coughs, his hand a throbbing mass of agony. He found a vent that led to the alley. He kicked the grate out and fell 10 feet onto the wet cobblestones. He landed hard. He lay there in the trash, gasping for air, the cold rain hitting his burned face. He looked at his hand. It was a horror show. The skin was melted, hanging in strips. The pain was blinding. A normal man would have gone to the hospital. A normal man would have called for help. Bumpy Johnson stood up. He wrapped his ruined hand in his silk pocket square. He checked his watch. It was still ticking. He wasn't going to the hospital. He was going to dinner. Moretti and his crew were at a private social club 3 blocks away. They were celebrating. They were toasting to the end of the Harlem problem. They were laughing, eating veal, drinking red wine, convinced that Bumpy Johnson was currently being reduced to carbon. The club was dimly lit. The mood was festive. Then the front door opened. It didn't burst open. It opened slowly. A hush fell over the front room. The doorman backed away, his face pale as a sheet. Bumpy Johnson walked in. He looked like a demon rising from the pit. His suit was scorched and covered in soot. His face was smeared with ash and blood. He smelled of smoke and burnt flesh, but he walked with a steady, terrifying rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. He walked past the stunned patrons. He walked straight to the back room. Moretti was mid-laugh, a glass of wine raised in the air. "To the fire!" he was saying. The door swung open. Bumpy stood there. Moretti's glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the floor, splashing red wine like blood. The laughter died instantly. The room went so quiet you could hear the hiss of the gas lamps. They looked at him as if he were a ghost. How could he be here? Bumpy didn't say a word. He walked to the empty chair at the head of the table, the chair Moretti had been saving for his own boss. Bumpy pulled it out and sat down. He placed his right hand on the table. It was fine. Then he placed his left hand on the table. He slowly unwrapped the silk pocket square. The fabric stuck to the wounds. He peeled it away, inch by agonizing inch. He didn't flinch. He didn't look at his hand. He looked staring into Moretti's eyes. When the cloth fell away, the room gasped. The hand was a raw, mangled testament to the fire. The skin was melted. The tendons were visible. It was a gruesome, visceral display of damage. Moretti looked like he was going to sick. He was a butcher, but this was self-inflicted discipline. This was something else. "You left the stove on," Bumpy said. His voice was a rasp, damaged by the smoke, which made it sound like gravel grinding in a mixer. Moretti stammered, "Bumpy, it wasn't—" Bumpy reached out with his burned hand. He reached across the table. Moretti flinched, leaning back, terrified that Bumpy was going to strangle him. Bumpy didn't grab his throat. He grabbed Moretti's wine glass, the one the waiter had just refilled. He wrapped his melted, raw fingers around the crystal. The heat from his own inflammation must have been agonizing against the cool glass. Blood and serum smeared onto the crystal stem. He took a sip. He set the glass down. "You tried to burn me," Bumpy whispered. "But you forgot one thing, Moretti. Fire doesn't kill the devil. It just makes him feel at home." He stood up. He leaned over the table, bringing his face inches from Moretti's. "You have until I finish a cigarette to get out of New York. If I see you after that, I won't use fire. I'll use a spoon." Bumpy turned and walked out. He didn't kill them. He didn't have to. He had done something far worse. He had walked into their sanctuary, burned and broken, and shown them that they couldn't kill him. He had shown them that his tolerance for pain was higher than their capacity to inflict it. Moretti fled the city that night. He didn't pack, he just ran. The story of the man who walked out of the fire and sat down to dinner spread through the underworld like a virus. It terrified them. It wasn't the violence that scared them, it was the composure. It was the fact that he sat there with melted skin and drank their wine. Bumpy eventually went to a doctor, a back-alley surgeon who owed him a favor. He refused painkillers while they scrubbed the wounds. He wanted to remember. He wanted the scar to be a reminder. His hand never fully healed. It was always scarred, the skin tight and shiny. He didn't hide it. When he negotiated deals in the future, he would rest that hand on the table. He would let the other bosses look at it. He would let them see the cost of crossing him. That scarred hand became a symbol. It was a contract written in flesh. It said, "I have been through hell. What can you possibly threaten me with?" The legend of the burning room cemented Bumpy Johnson's reign. It taught the mob that you couldn't defeat a man who didn't fear his own destruction. It taught them that power isn't about avoiding pain. It's about enduring it and then serving it back to the world. Pain is temporary, legend is forever, and the man who can sit in the fire and not burn, he owns the world. This is Bumpy Johnson Files. Subscribe for the stories history tried to bury.